Frantic with worry, she pushed the two boys out of her way and made her way past them to what lay on the ground. James was there, his tall, lanky frame face up, looking at the sky with dazed eyes. His skin was very ashen and cold to the touch, and there was a blue tinge to his pale lips. He was still breathing, but he looked awful. His breath was coming out in ragged gasps and his eyes were beginning to glaze over. Sarah cried out in despair as she saw a thin golden mist rise out of James's body and drift upward toward the sky. James is dying, she thought, watching his spirit as it continued to drift away from his body. I must do something. This cannot happen. As if in answer to her thoughts, she felt something separate from her body to hang above her head. She looked up to see that a pale blue mist had joined the golden one hovering above James's body. It stayed there, as if anchoring James's spirit in place. Yet another mist joined the two already in place. This was a thin white light. Argan. She knew instinctively that this was the spirit that shared James's body and that he, too, was fighting to keep James alive. Sarah reached out and grabbed James's hand, trying desperately to make him aware of her presence. She was aware of a bright yellow glow surrounding them that got brighter as she sat next to him. She was also aware that aside from the other people standing nearby, they were not alone. There was another presence with them and it was very powerful. James, she reached out to him with her mind. What happened? What can I do to help you? It was the wolves. One of them bit my leg and then I felt so funny. Now I don't know what's happening. I can't move and I can't breathe very well. Something is telling me to just give up and leave, but you know there is something else that says I'm not supposed to listen to it. That voice in my head is getting louder. It is telling me not to give up, that I am supposed to fight and overcome because that is what we were meant to do, came the weak reply. But I don't know if I can, Sarah. His thoughts were becoming difficult to hear, they faded in and out of her head as if coming from a great distance. I think I see my parents. They are smiling at me. No. She screamed out to him with all of her will. You will not leave me, you will not leave us. As she shared his thoughts, Sarah looked at his leg and saw his pants were torn. He had a large ragged wound there. The wound was bleeding profusely. She knew that she had to stop the bleeding somehow and she had to do it quickly. Frantically, she slapped her hand down on top of the open wound and pressed hard. James barely stirred when she did this, and that scared her even more. A large hand settled on top of hers and then another smaller hand joined that one, followed by one very small hand at the top of the pile. She could feel the warm blood oozing out from under her fingers. No matter how hard she pressed, she could not seem to stop it from flowing. She sat on the frosty ground and prayed as hard as she had ever prayed in her entire life. Please, don't let my friend die, don't let him give up. As soon as she thought this, the yellow light around them got even brighter, and the air around them seemed to vibrate and crackle. James's leg beneath their hands began to feel very warm. She looked down at his pale face and noted a faint pink tinge to the skin. Encouraged, she prayed even harder. She heard the others call out to I am also, and to her great joy, noticed his breathing was less labored and back into a more normal rhythm. The golden light above his body had slowly lowered itself back down until it dissolved into his skin, to be followed a minute later by the white light. Then his eyes slowly fluttered open and she looked into his beautiful dark eyes now filled with so much life. She hugged him tightly to her and found that they were suddenly the center of a huge bear hug with the entire group joining them from all sides. Her back was wet with tears shed by one of James's brothers. She thought it was Harry. It was several minutes before they were able to free themselves from the emotional group. James stood up next to her on shaky feet, supported from the other side by his father. And the yellow light slowly dissolved into the sky. "Are you able to travel?" Ollie said, patting James's shoulder. "We must get away from here as quickly as we can. We have to gather our forces and consider what to do next." James nodded his head weakly and they headed toward the fallen wolves, except there were no fallen wolves now. There were trees and plenty of rocks strewn about the area where Thomas had thrown them, but the bodies of the wolves were not there. Sarah gasped in shock at the absence of the bodies. He had hit every one of them, she was sure. Ollie and the others gathered close together and looked around carefully. An eerie moan sounded in the stillness of the night and a dark mist began to form on the surface of the lakes. Then Sarah heard the howling of several wolves, coming from what remained of the small grove of trees to their left. "I think we have walked into a trap," Thomas said as the dark mist continued to rise from the frozen lakes.